You know, my dad was an honorable man. And my dad used to have an expression. He said, Joey, your job's about a lot more than a paycheck. It's about your dignity. It's about respect. It's about being able to look your kid in the eye and say, honey, it's going to be okay, and mean it. Well, that's what you're all about. That's what the legislation is about. It's about dignity. Simple dignity. Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity.
What did you think of President Biden making his witness and the message that they are coming for your Social Security?
Waste of time. Fell on deaf ears. I watched about 5 minutes of it. I didn't really have much interest in it because he's no longer the president. When he was the president, there were some things that he did, like opening the borders, which were horrendous and obviously debilitating to this nation. And because of it, that accentuated the point that he needed to go. And once he saw that, the man that once promised to be a transitional president decided that he wanted to stay and ultimately had to be forced out. And so when those kind of things happen, clearly a lot of what you have to say is falling on deaf ears, particularly when all you're doing is regurgitating things that you said in the past, not just when you were president, but when you were a candidate for the presidency before you ultimately won the election in 2020. It's not to say that he's completely right or wrong. Is to simply say, unfortunately, because of the things that have transpired over the last several years, a lot of people weren't too interested in hearing from him. Think about it. Not even the Democrats themselves appeared happy that he was coming out and giving some kind of speech. Rather, there were a plethora of them asking the question, why, for what possible purpose did it serve? And certainly they're asking themselves now after seeing him speak.
Scranton Joe is back. As you saw from the intro, he started going in, talking about dignity. Everyone deserves dignity. And I kept asking myself, even Donald Trump? Does Donald Trump deserve dignity? And it made me think about this question. I think I left it as the title of this video, is who do you think Americans regretted voting for the most? Joe Biden or Donald Trump? If I give you the timeline, Joe Biden is the most popular president in U.S. history with 81 million votes. Some people speculate that it was due to fraudulent matters. Who knows? Who knows? All I know is less than 81 million people showed up for Kamala Harris. And the argument many people were making was that Joe Biden was no longer popular. He had a trending approval rating. And it made me come back to this idea that the media is trying to perpetrate right now. The media is trying to perpetrate right now that people are regretting voting for Donald Trump. And I got a video here that we're going to react to in this video that kind of debunks or pours cold water on that narrative. But this question for me is a very simple one to answer. I believe Americans regretted voting for Biden more than they regretted voting for Donald Trump, because Trump warned us of all the economic chaos that was going to happen with Joe Biden. And unfortunately, it did. We had the highest inflation rate in 40 years. That was under Joe Biden's watch. Joe Biden spent the most money during peacetime in U.S. history. He spent more government money. He made the stock market so reliant on government money that when Donald Trump said, yeah, we're going to cut back on some of this stuff, it is causing friction in the markets right now. And Joe Biden made this promise that he was going to be a transitional president, as you saw what Stephen A. Smith was mentioning. But his legacy was supposed to be the guy that saved the Democrats from Donald Trump. But inevitably, he became the guy that vindicated Donald Trump, galvanized people to go against the Democratic Party, because essentially that's what happened, to the point now that you got progressives like AOC being seen as the future of the Democratic Party.
AOC has returned yet again to be, at least right now, what appears to be the future of the Democratic Party. Julie, I don't know if you would disagree being a Democrat.
I agree with you, actually.
But from our vantage point as Republicans, we would love that, because I think most American voters, especially those who self-identify as independents, are probably to the center of the left or to the center of the right. They're not extremist progressives. And so if the Democratic Party want to go down that path, I think it's going to bode well for Republicans in terms of our electoral success.
All right, well.
So with all this in the background, it makes the argument clear as day that very few people regret voting for Donald Trump, because people voted for Donald Trump since 2016. There's some people out here who's been voting for this guy for 8 years. Imagine that. 3 elections. There's people out there who voted for the same president 3 times, 3 elections in a row, which is Donald Trump. And you're going to tell me people are regretting their choice for Trump because of this stuff that's going on with China? Trump's administration just started. We had 4 years to look back and regret voting for Joe Biden. There was people who regret voting for Joe Biden when the Hunter laptop story came out and the media went out of their way to hide it. Democratic voters themselves wanted a new candidate for the 2024 primaries. And the party, the Democrats, decided, nah, you stuck with Joe Biden. And another thing that vindicates my opinion that most Americans regret voting for Joe Biden more than they will regret voting for Donald Trump is for the simple fact that we all know if Joe Biden had stayed during November 2024, he may have even lost worse than Kamala Harris. Make that make sense. Donald Trump beat Kamala Harris and got the popular vote. That would have crucified Joe Biden's legacy. I mean, it's already getting crucified now. You got Democrats coming out of the woodworks, putting out stories about how he was cognitively unfit, right? The media now wants to admit that he was mentally unfit. Look at how these people turn on Joe Biden. Now it's convenient to turn on him. These same people making excuses for him, saying, "Oh no, you're making fun of Joe Biden's stutter." Now are coming out clean and saying, "Oh wow, he was mentally unfit to be in office," and I can't believe we just now realized it during the debate stage. Actively helping the guy, actively trying to frame everything in the best light for Joe Biden, and still lost the election. Him and his party still lost the election. His own party members forced him out of the race. You got Democratic donors not trusting of the Democratic Party because they don't know what they're going to do with the money. The same party that spent $1 billion still put themselves $20 million in debt and still lost an election, both the popular vote and lost all the swing states. You spent $1 billion for what, Democratic Party? And they still have the goal to try to perpetrate this narrative that people are regretting voting for Donald Trump. But I digress with my little monologue here. Let's get into the clip that you guys want to see of CNN reacting to the numbers of very few Trump voters regretting their choice.
What about Trump voters? How do they feel about all this? One man can answer that question. He just happens to be the one man standing beside me right now, CNN chief data analyst Harry Anton. Let's talk about Trump voters and how they feel. Do they regret their vote?
I mean, this is the big question, right? I hear all these stories, all these articles. All the Trump voters, they regret what they did back in 2024. I'm here to tell you, very few of them regret what they did back in 2024. What are we talking about? Trump voters looking back at 2024. We got a new poll out. The poll was conducted this month. What percentage would change their vote to a different candidate? We're talking just 2%, just 2%. That's not even a wide.
So Democrats, let me give you this straight. Liberal media. You created a whole narrative about Trump supporters regretting their vote based off of 2%. It's similar for Harris, but my real thing is I want to know the numbers for Biden voters looking back in 2024. Do they regret their vote for Joe Biden? That's the real number. That's the real comparison we want to know. Because we already knew Democratic voters, they wanted a new candidate. So, of course, the number is going to be similar for Harris. But I want to know about Joe Biden. Because right now, it speaks to Joe Biden's legacy. Because I think that's one of the things he cared about the most. And I knew it was going to be devastating if that rematch with Donald Trump played out in 2024. Oh, my God. It would have been devastating for him. The guy that can brag that, oh, I'm the one who beat Donald Trump. And he would have been the same guy that lost to Donald Trump. It was cementized the fact that Democrats, they don't govern better. They just pretend they do. And these poll numbers show a certain reality that the Democrats can't hide their governance. They can't hide. When you look for data, because at the end of the day, data doesn't prove a narrative. Data proves a result. And the results are that Americans don't regret voting for Donald Trump as much as they do Joe Biden. That's my example. That's my question that I ask here today. Because if you look at the job approval numbers of Joe Biden, how is he the most popular president in U.S. history? Yes, you heard me correctly. Joe Biden is the most popular president based on the voting numbers in U.S. history. Yet during his administration, At the end of his administration in 2024, he had one of the worst approval ratings ever as a U.S. president, worse than Trump. And you expect people to sincerely believe that 81 million people voted for that guy? Hard to believe. Hard to believe. I'm just saying. Let's continue.
On the road. And then there's this additional 1% who say they would rather not vote. We're talking overall under 5% might or would have changed their vote, Donald Trump voters back in 2024. And then you ask, okay, the same question to Kamala Harris voters, and it turns out the numbers are rather similar. So if there was a repeat, if folks got to be able to redo their vote that they had back in 2024, would the result be any different? I doubt it would be. I doubt it would be, or it would still be extremely close. The bottom line is, for all this talk of Trump voters regretting their vote, in the numbers, it really just doesn't show up, John.
So the stickiness with Trump voters and President Trump in this presidency, how does it?
Imagine that. All the fear. Imagine the effort. Like, think about this. As a biased news outlet, that letting your liberal bias dictate how you frame these events. The China stuff, right? The chaos in the markets, the uncertainty, all this propaganda. Damn, can I call it propaganda? Let me know in the comment section. I think this is propaganda. They're trying to convince you to have a certain perception, to see Donald Trump in a certain light. And the fact that these numbers are the way they are speaks volumes from the lack of credibility that journalism now has in the media or the knowledge system that we have here in today. Because my argument has always been that these people are trying to get you to believe a certain narrative, to believe in something, color your lens in a certain light. And the fact that this is not working, oh my God, it just further validates my point that journalism is activism and that many Americans are seeing through the activism from these journalists.
Compared to his first president?
Yeah, okay. So, I was interested in sort of a historical analogy here, does this look similar or different from back in 2017, looking at 2016? Well, in February of 2017, 4% of Trump voters say they'd shift their vote. That's actually slightly more than the 3% this time around. So, you look back, you say, okay, there's these Trump voters who really regret their vote. Historically speaking, they really don't regret their vote. And if anything, the number this time around is actually smaller than it was the first time around. And it's certainly smaller than the number we saw coming out of 2020, of course, after the events of January 6th. So the bottom line is this. If there's some idea out there that Trump voters are going around, man, I wish I had voted for Kamala Harris instead of Donald Trump, the numbers say that is a fanciful universe. It really, for the most part, does not exist.
Except in liberals' imagination. This is why I said liberals have a strong imagination. This is why I said liberals don't live in reality. They're wishing, like, end of the day, what liberals regret, they regret that they lost. They regret that they chose Kamala Harris. That's what they really regret. And they're trying to project this onto Trump. Oh, don't you regret your vote now? Don't you regret your vote now? It reminds me of the Freedom Tune video that I watched one time, where these guys were saying, oh my God, he just deported 600,000 people. Oh, that sounds great. Not understanding where Trump supporters are coming from. Instead, what liberals do is they pretend they understand what Trump supporters are asking for or would regret, and then they cast that on the media, on these news channels, on these CNN debates, talking about how, oh yeah, we talked to Trump supporters and they regret their vote. It breeds more credence to the argument that many conservatives are having about how liberals are paying protesters to show up on these GOP town halls and making them pretend that they're GOP voters. Just like Anna Navarro from The View is pretending to be a Republican. We all know you're not a Republican. A Republican don't vote for a Democrat 3 times in a row and still call themselves a Republican. And the facade is over. And it's crazy to me that I feel like I think this should be a humbling experience for the mainstream media to know that they don't have a stronghold over public perception anymore. And I think this is a good sign for many Americans, including myself, to know that many people are not just going willy-nilly with all the framings and all the narratives that this media propaganda industry ran by majority liberals are doing.
What about the Republican brand in general? Any evidence that people are leaving that brand faster than they're leaving the Democrats.
Yeah, exactly. Yesterday we spoke about Trump's approval rating, right? But it's very important to note, nothing cannot be nothing. That is, when you put two folks together or two folks against each other, the results might look different than just looking at one of them. And on this particular measure, which I think is so important, because what we saw in 2024 was Republicans getting a rare lead on party identification. It was a 1-point lead according to Gallup. Look at where it was in an average of Gallup polls so far this year, plus 2 points for Republicans. If anything, the Republican brand has actually perhaps gotten a smidgen stronger, though these are within the margin of error.
Yeah. We're all within the margin of error. And it goes back to my video that I just showed out. More Americans are identifying with MAGA. I told you, MAGA was I've been saying it for a long time. I got the receipts. If you search my channel, you put MAGA is actually a centrist movement somewhere around. Somewhere is the statement I put out as a video. I go through how MAGA is not tied essentially to conservatives or liberals. It's essentially tied to an idea of a nationalist patriotism almost. Hey, we all Americans here. All of us as Americans have a common interest in this country, making sure this country is prosperous, because we all in some way benefit from this country being prosperous. And if we squander this country, we all gonna find somewhere else to be. And it's up to us, no matter your gender, political ideology, religion, we all Americans here, and we have to do what's in the best interest of this country. And we have to be more pragmatic about what is best for this country, and can't let our ideological passions override that premise that we all share this country. And we all need this country to be at its best for all of us to benefit. And the things that Democrats are actively doing goes against the common interest of the American people. This is why Democrats focus so much on gender, sexuality, right? Race. This is why they always try to divide you into categories. Because if, God forbid, for the Democrats, if everyone in this nation saw themselves as an American first, it's a wrap for the Democratic Party. Because imagine this. Imagine the Democratic Party trying to pitch to the American people without referencing gender or race or sexuality. How are you going to run? How are they going to run? How are they going to run? Everything is about, oh my God, it's going to hurt disabled people. It's going to hurt black people. It's hurt, right? With this thing with Harvard. Trump just finished threatening Harvard that, hey, we're going to remove your taxpayer money if you stop discriminating against people based on their skin color. DEI, which is DEI, aka racism under new management. Now the liberals are crying out loud, oh my God, this is so bad. He's hurting one of our most astute academic institutions. Then you go in, you look in the data, 96% of the faculty vote and donate to the Democratic Party. Of course, they want to funnel more taxpayer money into that system. And you see why they love credentialism so much. You wonder why all these experts, you wonder why liberal bias has infiltrated economics, all these other fields, because of these factories they call colleges. And the Democrats doing all this, fighting for illegals, going to El Salvador right now as we speak. Van Hollen, I think that's his name, going over there right now to try to talk to President Bukele and ask him to, hey, can you let your citizen that we deported come back to our country? I know he's gang affiliated. I know there's some questions about whether he had domestic violence against his wife, but we want him back in our country. Make it make sense. Make it make sense. But this is the Democratic Party. But they keep thinking that there's pressure on the GOP. No. There's pressure on the Democrats to change. And whether they're going to change for the worse or change for the better, that's ultimately up to the Democratic Party themselves. But I'll let this video play out, and then I'll wrap up with my final thoughts.
Very different from 2017 when Democrats held a 5-point advantage. And I'll finally note, this looks very much like the generic ballot trend, which in 2025 looks an awful bit like November of 2024, when Republicans, of course, won and held the House.
We will see if
these numbers hold up. We will see if our propaganda can work a different way. That's how I take it. But hey, I'll leave it off of there. I think I said enough. I think I said my piece. Let me know what you think in the end of the video. I think every individual, not every individual, but most people watching this video will come to kind of to the same conclusions that I am, is that most Americans regret voting for Joe Biden more than they regret voting for Donald Trump. And that this narrative of people regretting for voting for Donald Trump when he's only 4 months into it. Oh, sorry, 3 months into his administration. It's kind of hilarious. But I digress. The media keeps trying to wish cast this into reality and hoping it sticks. But I don't think the brainwashing I don't think it works the same. But I digress. Let me know your thoughts and perspective in the comment section below. I'll be interested to hear what you guys have to say and your thoughts and your perspectives on this matter. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Please share this video if you feel so inclined. It really does help me out in the algorithm. And I'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace.